by the protesters, and he sided with the people and against Gaddafi, and then they gave him mercy and released him and left him to be at home with his family, because they're tribes there, they're all family, and he turned against them and brought a brigade, and this is the guy that's coming to attack him with the 35 tanks, the guy that they gave mercy to and released once they have captured. So
and if these 35 tanks and whatever else goes alongside that decide to unleash their fury upon Zawiya, what would the people there have to resist with?
Well, they did take some weaponry from the police and from an army warehouse that was nearby. So they do have some arms, but they don't have the arms that the Gaddafi loyalists do. The Gaddafi loyalists are using the most extreme weapons that are available to them, that they've acquired over the past many number of years. So it's going to be a tough battle. I just hope and pray to God that that Zawiya prevails, and Zawiya has a very big will, and I think they might prevail, but I'm very worried and scared. My family is in Zawiya, so it's very difficult.
We understand. Thank you very much indeed, Ahmed Shabani. There have been, we know, reported deaths in Zawiya. Diplomats overall, though, do think up to 2,000 people may have died in the crackdown on anti-government protesters. The United Nations now voting unanimously to impose sanctions on Gaddafi's regime. The UN resolution demands an end to the violence in Libya and recognition of people's legitimate demands. It calls for an investigation into the bloodshed and for attacks on civilians to be referred to the International Criminal Court. There's an end to all arms sales to Libya, but the UN Secretary-General says it won't stop there. Kristen Salumi is our correspondent in New York.
Will those in favor of the draft resolution contained in document S/2011/95 please raise their hand?
It took all day for the Security Council to reach an agreement, but in the end, the message to Libya's Muammar Gaddafi from the Security Council was strong and unified. All 15 members agreed to impose sanctions. They called for an end to the violence and vowed to hold the perpetrators accountable.
It takes new steps against the use of mercenaries by the Libyan government to attack its own people. And for the first time ever, the Security Council has unanimously referred an egregious human rights situation to the International Criminal Court. As President Obama said today, when a leader's only means of staying in power is to use mass violence against its own people, he has lost the legitimacy to rule and needs to do what is right for his country by leaving now.
The resolution refers Libya to the International Criminal Court for investigation, a provision some delegations initially opposed.
We deplore the use of force, which is totally unacceptable. We earnestly hope that calm and stability are restored at the earliest without any further violence.
The resolution had the support of Libya's own delegation to the UN, a fact that swayed some delegations to vote for it.
The Tripoli regime no longer has any credibility. It goes without saying that this resolution represents moral support for our people faced with the regime firing on them.
This is just the second time that the Security Council has asked the International Criminal Court to investigate a country, and the first time that the request had the unanimous support of the Council. Ambassadors said they wanted to send a clear, swift, and strong message to Muammar Gaddafi and his inner circle, but it remains to be seen just who is listening. Kristen Salumi, Al Jazeera, the United Nations.
And Australia's putting pressure on the Libyan government, imposing its own sanctions. The country's Foreign Minister, Kevin Rudd, telling Al Jazeera that more measures do need to be taken against Gaddafi and his regime.
The actual teeth of this UN Security Council resolution are quite sharp. Firstly, in terms of the targeted sanctions against members of the regime. This is very important. The Gaddafi family has significant financial assets invested around the world, including in the United Kingdom and elsewhere. This, therefore, affects directly personal financial interests. Secondly, an arms embargo is necessary in order to prevent the further resupply of military equipment to those military units remaining supportive of Gaddafi. And thirdly, the criminal court reference is important. It's only the second time in the history of the UN this has been done. It's not so much that Gaddafi himself may take notice of this, but those underneath him must realise that in executing any command to take violent action against civilians, these people who have pulled triggers will be brought to justice
All right,
as well.
Let me stop you there if I could for a moment, and just forgive me for interrupting, but the point remains that the fact is that Gaddafi has, for 40 years now, more or less snubbed his nose at the international community anyway. These threats, these sanctions will mean nothing to him, particularly since he's already vowed to die a martyr in Libya should the need arise. So my question remains, in between the time that these sanctions that you say are not toothless, they're very sharp-toothed, when they actually have an effect on the country in some sense, in between that time and now, there could still be enormous bloodshed. What is the international community going to do if he uses the arms he already has against his own people and starts causing some serious bloodshed?
The first thing I'd say also is that you said that Gaddafi himself may be contemptuous of these measures. Those underneath him who take his commands may actually be attentive to these measures, because that is the whole purpose of the International Criminal Court. However, I also believe that further action needs to be taken by the Council. You mentioned before the desirability of no-fly zones over Libya. We in Australia fully support that course of action. In my own correspondence with the President of the Security Council, I have said that Australia fully supports the imposition of no-fly zones within Libya itself.
Well, with me, Tariq Youssef, Senior Research Fellow at the Dubai School of Government, also from Benghazi, the town where the protests kicked off. Tariq, what do you make of what the United Nations is doing? Because it's a leviathan that's often criticised for being extremely slow and useless. But what are these sanctions, what effect will they have?
I think a very catastrophic moral and political effect on the regime, on Gaddafi and those around him. The regime spent tens of millions of dollars in the last 10 years trying to rehabilitate its image, rejoin the world community, and now they've essentially been reinstated as a pariah, rogue state again. Domestically, I think the UN vote matters as well. Libyans recall that it was the UN in 1949 that created the country of Libya as we know it today. The swift and decisive action in the last 24 hours suggests, it sends the signal to the Libyan people, to those in the opposition, that in fact the world community is wholesale behind them now at every level. This was a unanimous vote with many measures, financial, political, travel bans, and it targeted individuals around Gaddafi who wield still immense influence and could very much decide the end game for this regime.
Is the corollary of that when Libya was welcomed back into the international regime, there were those in Libya who were aghast at the fact that that had happened?
Absolutely. A lot of people were disgusted, I must add. People were suspicious even on the outside. This was viewed as a contingent plan to rehabilitate Libya and hoped that the process of normalization will change the regime. Saif became sort of the spearhead of much of this. He became the poster child for the new Libya. But domestically, that did not translate into credible reforms, credible change. And so you had a disconnect. And Libyans felt that the normalization process essentially just saved Gaddafi and saved the regime as opposed to brought any real change.
When you hear of the protests and the fighting moving into the west of the country and in places like Zawiya, and Misrata, where we understand there are government troops encircling the city, and also in Zawiya as well.
Yes.
Hearing from somebody who's just spoken to his family there. What does that suggest to you about the way that the movement is working towards Tripoli?
The movement is essentially moving westward along the coast, taking the bigger cities, but also smaller cities. Misrata is very significant. It's the third largest city. You've got pockets around Tripoli that have also beyond the control of Gaddafi at the moment, and that suggests that all the mobilization is designed to push the opposition towards Tripoli.
Listen, what I'm going to do is ask you to stop there, because we're talking about Zawiya, and we have on the line Izzedine, I think it is Izzedine, who is in AlJazeera itself. Somebody we were talking to a short while ago, Zadine, was telling us that there were government troops, possibly tanks nearby. What do you know of what's outside? Yes, we can hear you. We're trying to get a translation for you. Can I just ask you the question again? What do you know of what's happening in AlJazeera? Well, it doesn't sound like it's working for us. We'll try and get Izzeddin back on and talk to Tariq Youssef in a short while about what's going on there. Now, what I'm going to do now is go to Oman, because I want to bring in some of the other things that are happening in the broader Middle East, North Africa, and then talk to Tariq Youssef in just a moment. Security officials do say that at least 2 people have been shot dead by Omani police. Rubber bullets and tear gas used on demonstrators in the industrial city of Sohar. Witnesses say at least 1,000 people gathered demanding political reform, and that a police station and a government office building are on fire. Let's talk to Basma Al-Raji, joins us on the line from the Omani capital, Muscat. Are you hearing reports from this area north of the capital about what happened there? Basma Al-Raji? Yeah, I hope you can hear me. I just wondered if you're hearing accurate reports about what's happening to the north of Muscat, in the area where the protesters are said to have been shot.
Currently, I am in the capital, Muscat, in front of the Consultative Shura Council. We are staging a sit-in. Currently, we were approached by a deputy from Nasser Al-Mawali, the deputy speaker of the Shura Council. He came to talk to us under instructions from the government. We were informed that all the decrees that were handed down yesterday that led up to this uprising were frozen. What is taking place in Sohar currently and in Muscat is a reaction to what's going on in Sohar.
And what was it about these decrees? What was it about these decrees that so upset the people?
The decrees handed down yesterday were merely ministerial reshuffle and restructuring. Some ministers were replaced, but people are calling for reforms